Ora, cá estamos novamente. Hoje também era para ser um vídeo sobre outro tema, mas resolvi vir aqui falar de um problema que já acontece há muito tempo. Eu já fiz um vídeo aqui atrasado, há alguns meses atrás, ou até se calhar há mais de alguns meses, ok? Pá, mas acho que o problema, vejo que as pessoas continuam a cair no mesmo problema e no que toca a malta que tem as boards da ASUS. Acho que o problema se agravou. Eu vou mostrar o vídeo aqui de um canal moed conhecido, talvez dos maiores canais de informática no mundo, que é do Games Nexus, e ele vai-vos explicar tudo e eu depois vou entrar em mais detalhes, ok? Vamos passar aqui o vídeo, eu vou colocar aqui só um momentinho, a ver se eu consigo colocar, ok. Malta que vem pelo TikTok e que esteve cá ontem na outra live, no dia anterior, quem me perguntou algumas coisas pelo próprio TikTok por via mensagem, eu já respondi a toda a gente, ok? Portanto, malta que me fez as perguntas, pá, passem por lá e já vão verificar isso. Ora bem, então vamos ver aqui o vídeo do Gamers Nexus, ok? Eu vou ativar as legendas, pá, não são as legendas que a gente quer, mas é o que nós conseguimos arranjar, não é? Eu pessoalmente para mim não precisava de legendas, mas traduzir automaticamente para português, mas vamos colocar aqui que há pessoas que não sabem, eu de qualquer maneira vou sempre, quando achar que tem tema mesmo para a gente falar português de Portugal, depois há o português, não é? A inteligência artificial ainda não é perfeita. Ora, vamos começar
Asus has
aqui.
had several significant vulnerabilities in its software and its hardware over the last several months, and these are all kind of popping up at the same time. This is something you need to be aware of if you use any of their devices, or you
Está a
might use some of
aparecer,
it, or their software. And this includes Armoury Crate. Surely
ok?
nobody could have ever foreseen this as a problem. I mean, basically everyone foresaw it was a problem, but Asus continued to push it anyway. But that's not alone. There are other exploits we're talking about today, including one for the RMA system, which potentially can expose millions of customer records if it had been exploited. And there's still active research going on Asus's software, so you never know what else could be
Se
found.
não traduz para português.
And one of the vulnerabilities involved routers that are being exploited actively, where there's potential to
Ok?
build a botnet. And that is a separate concern from all the software level vulnerabilities we're talking about today as well. One of the
Coisas muito,
vulnerabilities
muito
involves
graves.
administrator credentials hard coded into user software,
Okay.
which could then be used to potentially access millions of customer records from Asus's warranty system if the exploit had been used and discovered by bad actors publicly. And we don't really have a great way of knowing if it had been. The good news is that Asus's warranty system doesn't really help anyway, so there's not a lot of reason
Esse
to
é
use
outro
it.
problema também que ele
The
já
bad
falou
news
aqui há uns
is
tempos atrás.
the people who did try to use it could be at risk. And just to be clear, a different kind of risk than the general anxiety that Asus will put you through in order to get help. Now, if you've ever taken a beginner computer science class, you've probably heard of the term code smell, or the idea that you can see or smell something in the code that indicates there may be a deeper problem without actually having to see the deeper problem. And Asus's code smells pretty bad. That's the kind of feeling we got when we boot up a fresh system that's brand new and has never been connected to the internet and immediately gets pop-ups from Asus asking if we'd like to download Armoury Crate, complete with logo.
Nunca
And just as a
instalem isto,
reminder,
ok? Já vamos
that's the
chegar lá.
part that's not the malware.
Pois.
That's the part that's supposed to be the software that's you're supposed to use. But the fact that there's space carved out in the motherboard, and this has been true for years now on Asus devices, and we've been complaining about it for years.
Vamos
Every
falar da ASUS
time
ROG,
we have to deal
MSI
with
e da
this,
Gigabyte,
where
ok?
there is space that is designed to host Asus utilities that can survive a reformat. It can be activated without internet connectivity. You don't have to be any kind of security expert, and we aren't at GN, to know that there's something gross and disturbing about this level of sort of subsurface vulnerability beneath your OS. And Asus's continued push here has led to some of its competitors doing the same. This is a
SOS
practice that
alerta,
needs to stop,
cuidado, ok?
probably won't stop,
Software,
but it's a
este é
practice that
da
should
ASUS ROG.
stop. We are rounding up today some of the vulnerabilities that have come out over the past several months. These include vulnerabilities for Driver Hub, which is ASUS utility, Armoury Crate, an active exploit for ASUS's routers. So it's kind of a distinction between some of these things.
Ele só vai falar de ASUS por causa dos problemas que apareceram, mas todos os outros têm.
And hopefully haven't been exploited.
E eu já falo isso há
Others are being actively
anos.
exploited, like the router issue.
Especialmente o da MSI. Também tive bordo da
We're going to
MSI.
summarize ASUS's security issues for 2025 so far. And also take a moment to say to ASUS, we and pretty much every other enthusiast told you so about the Armoury Crate thing. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Thermaltake TR100 portable.
Publicidade à
So the important
frente.
part up front, there are four main vectors that we're talking about today. These include things that have been exploited, and they include things that maybe haven't been exploited, but were found by researchers, reported to ASUS, and have been, at this point when this video is going up, already closed. The affected software and hardware includes ASUS Driver Hub, My ASUS, ASUS Armoury Crate, and ASUS routers with an active exploit.
Muita atenção a este software que vocês instalam, ok?
Of infected devices. And fittingly for this, I've worn our honeypot t-shirt, and these are in stock and shipping now. These are charity shirts. We are donating
Thanks,
profits to archive.org, the Cramden Institute, which does
pois.
and the public interest research group Archive, especially.
Don't care about it.
Some significant accolades for its ability to preserve the internet so that we and others can do reporting. But if you want to grab one of the shirts to support these three groups directly, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net, and they also come with a card. And the playing card is a foil broken honeypot, which hopefully will be representative of what happens here. Anyway, we'll run through each of these in light depth today. Our goal with this content is to make sure that people are, one, aware of their potentially affected devices and software so that you can either update the software or ideally uninstall it, and definitely update your router firmware if you have an ASUS router.
My channel is in Portuguese, okay? Use your AI to change the language to Portuguese.
Installing malware behaving bloatware that performs a function which is basically useless and that you could do on your own.
Fazer aqui publicidade para farms de bots e coisas assim.
And that's a different issue. Now we'll start with Driver Hub today for ASUS. We got an email in April from Paul, aka Mr. Bruh, self-described programmer, and to quote him, aspiring cybersecurity, scare quotes, professional. The subject was
Malta que colabora com eles, passa informações e coisas importantes, eles depois vão em cima. O meu canal é grande, sempre que eles publicam algum vídeo, cuidado.
That prompts for install on boot. But the problem that Paul found wasn't in the firmware of the motherboard. The problem Paul found was in the software. And
o software, esse é que é o problema.
And because it is connected to the motherboard at a lower level, we have faith that someone will eventually find the real good stuff. It's in there somewhere. Just keep looking. You'll get it eventually. We've been talking with Paul about this after reading his research blog post, which you should check out for the full detailed story. It's also just pretty cool stuff, if a bit terrifying on the ASUS side. To paraphrase, if you click yes on that Driver Hub pop-up after a fresh Windows install, Driver Hub will install and run as a background process that checks whether updates are needed by communicating with ASUS's site. It does this by hosting a local service, quote, which a website or service can connect to by sending an API request to 127.0.0.1 on a predefined port, end quote. The website or service in question is driverhub.asus.com. So hopefully ASUS doesn't let that domain lapse anytime soon. At least that much is unlikely. But there's another problem. Paul found that Driver Hub only checks that the URL contains driverhub.asus.com. Contains, not is. So feasibly, you could point it to driverhub.asus.com. Fuck ASUS Armoury Crate, here's some malware on the side. .com. This part, at least, was reported separately to ASUS by another security researcher, Leon JZA, in addition to Paul. Leon JZA is the sole threat.
Tem que ser instalada, meu.
Using a URL containing the
Cansado de saber o problema.
Access 6 functions, and those included initialize, device info, reboot, log, install app, and update app. Some of those are privacy concerns, and giving a website the ability to instantly reboot your PC can be a pretty annoying bug. But update app was the function that Paul targeted. He found that using this function, you can download and permanently store any arbitrary file.
O RMA em particular, e tem que ser CEO a falar diretamente com ele e prometer certas coisas. Porque ficaram expostos.
Does a really good job of spelling out what this means in plain text that anyone can understand. It indicates that this potentially opens the path for a timing attack, where a signed executable is swapped for an unsigned one between the signature validation and the actual execution, according to Paul on his research blog. But it turns out there was a much easier path even than this. ASUS, like several other companies, packages its drivers with an auto-installer, ASUS Setup.exe. By running asus setup.exe with the silent install flag, it runs whatever executable is specified in the
Esta
silent
porcaria
install run
toda
property in
que se
asus
instala.
setup.ini.
Okay?
This meant that he could do any of the following to any system running Driver Hub. For example, and per the blog post, the user visits driverhub.asus.com.malware.com.
Nunca lhe
First,
façam
update
isto.
app request downloads for malware.exe. Second update app request downloads a custom asus setup.ini with silent install run equals malware.exe. Third, update app request downloads and runs legitimate asus setup.exe as admin, which in turn runs malware.exe as admin. Now, Paul clearly put work into decompiling the code and researching for this vulnerability and testing for it and building proofs of concept.
Imagina, malta, compra aquelas boards caras da ROG.
By an attacker
Estão a comprar esta porcaria
toda.
toda.
It doesn't seem like it required much more than the ability to host a website and build whatever the malware package is, or buy it, or there's even affiliate networks where you can get commissions for getting malware distributed, and then tweaking .ini files, which at least that part is something that most of the people in our audience probably have done at one point or another for playing video games. Now, despite this, and the fact that this was just sort of out there, Paul's opinion is that it is unlikely this particular exploit was being actively used. So a little bit of a sigh of relief for that, if that is true. As of May 9th, a fix to Driver Hub has been deployed, so you need to either update it or uninstall. We'd recommend...
Deixem ver só se... Aqui está. Eu acho que... Pois... Está a transmitir. Vamos ver aqui. Os dois vídeos. Então tenho que também avisar sempre a malta no YouTube. Vocês estão a ver duas lives, ok? Uma é esta e outra é esta. Vêm pela mesma indicação, mas são vídeos diferentes. Estão a ver aqui? Eu acho que... Pois, não é? Pronto. Que é uma na opção vertical e outra vai ser sempre na opção horizontal, tá bom? Portanto, só para saber.
And uninstalling it, because anywhere you don't need software, you should just get rid of it. Drivers is something that's pretty easy to do. It's a good skill to have if you don't have it. Most people in our audience should. And also, these apps, as they age, you never know what kind of vulnerability will be found in the future, just like this one, or if you don't hear about it and there's some kind of important critical security update, it now just becomes a permanent liability on the system until it is updated. But this isn't the only one today, and we're going to get into some of the others, including some which have not been fully resolved yet, or at least they don't seem to be, based on the research that's out there now. Now, as far as kind of the business and security researcher side of things, Paul's first email indicated that ASUS has a lack of incentives for penetration testers. We don't really know the norms or the conventions for that world, what is an acceptable bug bounty, how it should be handled. That's not our area, so we can't speak to that, and we don't feel qualified to talk about what bug bounties should be offered, and when or if they should be offered. What we can speak to, though, is the more obvious, which is, for whatever it's worth, ASUS's standard practice, at least based on the experience of a couple of researchers whose work we've looked at, of a thank you email and a contextless credit at the bottom of its security advisory page does seem a little underwhelming. Like, in the very least, pay or no pay.
Só põe uma lista a dizer que este colaborou connosco. O que é que eles fizeram para resolver o problema? Nada.
Like a good idea. At least then a user could go look up further information on it. But anyway, next up is ASUspicious, which is an excellent name, and potentially an even dumber vector by ASUS that could have been used to gain access to, for example, millions of customer records if used. Despite the lack of reward for the Driver Hub issue, or maybe because of it, Paul went on to dig up more ASUS problems. This is his second of two in this video, and then the other two are from other groups. This time, the flaw was in the ASUS RMA system. This also affects users with an ASUS account, so especially because it heavily encourages or requires
malta que faz RMAs está sempre também em perigo.
We also got a quote from Paul, the researcher on one of these issues.
Muito complicado.
Quote, although this likely affects those who have done RMAs and had to fill in their details as part of that, it can affect anyone with an ASUS account. For example, My ASUS prompts you to make an ASUS account when it first opens, although there's a button in the corner to skip the process, presumably with limited features. Also, the ROG forums require you to log in using your ASUS account and automatically logs you in if you're already.
O problema é que muita gente tem nos PCs, tem contas bancárias, fazem compras usando o cartão de crédito, tem coleções de jogos grandes por muitos anos, no Facebook, coisas assim, e isto pode ser tudo roubado, não é? Fotografias, pá, cuidado.
As long as you're using the German word for gift, which means poison. We aren't fans of the ASUS RMA system to such an extent that we sat down with an executive at ASUS for an uncomfortable interview seeking answers on behalf of customers. So the sentence
yeah. What you're firm in Discord.
And send customers a comprehensive list of available
Get the life, man.
Free and paid in our messaging.
Use an AI to
Is that a lie?
To put English to
But that was about
Portuguese.
customers not getting help. This is
Okay.
a new problem entirely.
This
For the
is a
record,
channel in
Asus after
Portuguese.
that, at least briefly in a window after we ran the video, it did help a lot of viewers who
Jesus.
had specific problems.
Cambada
But
de bots.
unfortunately, we still get emails daily now, especially now that we're over a year out from that, where people are still talking about how they're getting screwed over for warranty claims, and we'll probably reopen that investigation eventually. We're not sure the timing.
Aquela fotografia que ele mostrou há bocado foi de outra entrevista que ele teve com o CEO da ASUS.
With the My Asus
Um dos
software, Paul found
CEOs,
files containing hard-coded
caso da questão
credentials
do
with,
RMA.
quote, administrator level
Também já pus esse vídeo
that can be
aqui.
used to access the information of any Asus account, end quote. RMA tickets themselves may not be particularly interesting, but the associated information, according to Paul, quote, includes people's full names, date of birth, phone numbers, and full addresses, end quote. Given that we've personally used Asus's RMA system multiple times, although we use bogus information to alias ourselves so they can't find out it's us, we don't feel great about that because there's a lot of information that it has. It appears that older RMA tickets may cycle out of the system, but it's unclear. But Paul needed a ticket to do some probing, and for ethical and legal reasons alike, he was kind of limited on what he could do for testing, for research. So the issue is mostly, in theory, closed at this point.
Uma das
However,
coisas que
Paul
eles
is
também nos fazem
continuing
cair
and he has more
no
that we
programa
can't discuss,
deles,
and he is not ready to
o
disclose
Armoury
at this time,
Creator.
but he's still researching. What I can say is that we've coordinated with Paul, the security researcher here, to give permission and to give our
milhões de
serial
usuários
number
que
and
já
RMA ticket
perderam
information.
os
He
dados,
can use that to
contas.
do some poking at the system.
Eles conseguem
The
aceder
difference
ao
here,
RMA
the
que as pessoas
limitation there
fizeram,
being that
a
it's over a year old at
designação
this
de
point.
tudo,
And so you can probably
moradas,
use something a
tudo.
little fresher. And if you want to consent to giving a security researcher your RMA number and your serial number for the device, then we can coordinate with you on the thread and do some probing further. You can email team@gamersnexus.net.
É perigoso, cuidado. Muito cuidado nessas coisas.
Clearly, though, this investigation required cleverness and skill on Paul's part. But as with the driver hub issue, the actual exploitation...
Se ele aqui vai falando sobre isto, não é? Que passar para as partes mais interessantes. O vídeo também são 28 minutos, não é nada especial.
It's an active problem. On May 28, 2025, security and data science company Grey Noise published a post called AceHush, tradecraft of an emergent Asus botnet. In the post, they stated that, quote, in summary, we are observing an ongoing wave of exploitation targeting Asus routers, combining both old and new attack methods. AceHush refers to the coordinated campaign itself, which, quote, potentially
que a gente compra para ter em casa
botnet,
melhorzinho
quote.
do que os fornecedores, depois instalam aquele software, pimba.
Notably, some of the vulnerabilities used are ironically within the Asus AI protection feature itself, which, quote, leverages powerful cybersecurity solutions and cloud data centers from Trend Micro trademark to shield your smart home and all connected devices from cyber threats, end quote. At least it lives up to the artificially intelligent part of its name. Grey Noise pointed out that, quote, the backdoor is stored in non-volatile memory, NVRAM, and is therefore not removed.
Muita atenção, malta que tiver routers também dá.
No malware is actually installed. Our understanding is that it is impossible to use firmware patches to fix already compromised routers, and prevention instead relies on users updating firmware proactively before an attack ever happens. And there are firmware updates that are out and that are continuing to roll out. Census has published a live tracker for monitoring Asus routers with port 53282 open, and you can even see how many dozens of them there are in the US, for example. This is a telltale sign of having been exploited. Based on their observations, the number of devices has grown and shrunk rapidly at various points, with the drops potentially due to increased public attention or changing tactics. Perhaps more insidious is that the goal and the identity of the attacker exploiting this remains unknown. There's an overlap between a command and control IP address from the broader vicious trap exploitation campaign, though. This was previously identified by Sequoia and indicates the potential for a botnet. AceHush is specific to Asus. Vicious Trap is not.
Acho que é uma porta que abriram para quem tiver material boards, routers da ASUS e que não fazem o mínimo. Okay. Agora acho que a malta que tem esse material devia chatear a ASUS. Cá está. Okay. Olha, estou farto de dar o aviso, porque desde que os fabricantes, isto não acontece só com malta da ASUS, que tem board das ASUS. MSI faz isto, Gigabyte faz isto, ASUS ROG faz isto, ok? Eu vou mostrar alguns, porque eles instalaram esta porcaria embutida no próprio BIOS, em que vem por defeito download e instalar uma Create Application, logo por enable. Isto devia sempre estar desativado, e é o cliente que na BIOS podia ativar. Simples. Mas não. O que é que acontece? Tu vais formatar o teu PC, ok? Fizeste uma atualização da BIOS, a BIOS limpa tudo, só que isto por defeito em enable. Então o que é que fazes? Quando arrancas o PC, ok? Se imagina, vais formatar o disco, ele, mal entras depois no Windows, ele vai-te instalar o Armoury Create. Tão simples como isto. A MSI faz a mesma coisa, A Gigabyte faz a mesma coisa, a ASUS faz exatamente a mesma coisa.
iOS toggle that you should absolutely turn off if you have not. But even if you turn it off so that it doesn't pop up and propagate itself in
Pois,
Windows on a clean install with no internet connection, which is insane already, even if you turn it off, the BIOS updates in the
isso.
future will reset that flag. You'll need to
Pois,
remember to
é
keep
essa é
turning
que é a
it off.
questão.
And worse
Tem que se
still,
desativar
Windows now
sempre.
sometimes pulls down firmware updates for the boards when it does Windows updates. We've had this happen to our Asus laptops where Windows pulls down an update, flashes the firmware at the same time, and that can reset the Armoury crate toggle in BIOS, which will then reactivate it. The point being that
Muita
Asus's
atenção.
Armoury crate behaves like malware even before it's exploited. As of this writing, the two most recent entries on Asus's product security advisory page are
Isto é
both
tudo
for the Armoury
porcaria.
crate app, both credited to Marcin Iswal Noga of Cisco Talos, both due to vulnerabilities in the ASIO3.sys kernel driver. Armoury crate
Pois isso
software
está
involves
feito,
low-level
malta.
hardware access for things like RGB control, which means it has potential for some nasty abuse.
Aviso está feito. Ok?
If you want examples of some of that nasty abuse, you can see our WinRing 0 piece for more on that specific subject. That is not ASUS specific though. The first vulnerability was that a, quote, specially crafted IO request packet, IRP, can lead to stack-based buffer overflow, end quote. By using some classic path size limit shenanigans, Icewall was able to take advantage of Asus's bad code. Via Cisco Talos, quote, it's a common mistake made by developers who assume that maximum path length on Windows is 255 characters. It is not. End quote. According to the report, quote, to turn this vulnerability into kernel-level arbitrary code execution, attackers will need to bypass security
Malta,
code mitigation, end quote. This was just a bonus
tem
for
malware
Icewall,
no
not the main
PC,
target,
não
what we
sabe
understand, so he
porquê.
left it at that and moved on. This specific issue was patched on
É.
May 12th. From what we understand
Exato.
reading these posts, normally the communication with ASIO3.sys is restricted, but the restriction is done within Asus's own code by grabbing the hash of the executable, trying to access the driver, and comparing it to the hard-coded hash. In other words, only Asus cert service.exe is allowed to touch the driver. Icewall was able to abuse the hard links feature in Windows to get the hash of an arbitrary executable to match Asus cert service.exe, bypassing authorization. From that point on, Icewall was free to look for vulnerabilities and ways to attack the ASI03.sys driver and exploit it. He covered that in detail in his blog post.
Depois já
But
vou
in the
mostrar
end, even though he tried so hard and
nas
got so
outras
far,
marcas o que é que eles fazem.
this one mattered, actually. These were some of the most critical functions he gained access to.
Este
Quote,
foi o mais
mapping any
focado
physical memory address
porque
in virtual address space,
já
calling
está
process,
tudo
giving an access
comprovado
to
e é o
in-out
mais
IO port
perigoso.
indication instructions, giving a possibility
O
to
problema que pode
read
causar.
write value from to MSR register at certain index, and more, end quote. As a proof of concept, he also posted a video of himself running an escalated console. Exploiting this vulnerability would require access to the system, but as we've seen with the driver hub issue, access isn't impossible to get. And that's part of the concern. Vulnerabilities could feasibly, although it's getting complicated, nest and stack in a way where if you leave enough unpatched vulnerabilities in one area and you have some in the other, they could be used as prerequisites of each other to create a bigger, newer vulnerability or just open other ones up. There are a couple of other security updates for Asus in the past 6 months or so that aren't directly credited to external sources, so it's possible Asus found them on their own and patched them on their own. It's also possible, given Paul's experience, that they maybe didn't fully name or disclose exactly what
É uma
happened.
pena.
But in either instance, there are not
As
extensive write-ups available for
entidades
these issues
que
that we
deviam
can find.
controlar
My Asus
estas
patch,
coisas
CE
não encontravam.
2025-2027, addressed a situation that could
Por
lead to,
exemplo,
quote, the service crash and
as
potential memory
entidades
manipulation in some rare
supostamente
circumstances, end quote.
controlam
The
ou
Armoury crate patch for
ajudam
CVE
os direitos dos consumidores
2024-12957
em todos os
addressed, quote,
países
a file handling command vulnerability that, quote,
ignorarem
may
isto.
result in
Alguns nem
arbitrary
sabem
file
que
deletion,
existe
end quote.
isto.
Cool.
Né?
That's my
Só
favorite
pode.
kind of file deletion. Every hardware and software vendor has vulnerabilities.
Estão muito preocupados
Asus isn't
que
special here.
o
The thing
preço
that's
da batata
interesting about Asus
suba ou desça
is
10
its
cêntimos
desire to
e
continue pursuing
compra-se
certain
uma board à
types
borda
of
de 1000
additional
euros,
risk for its bloatware
compra-se
and motherboard level bullshit, like with
router
the Armoury
dos
crate,
bons
but
pode
also the
custar
fact that
200,
it is
300 euros
gigantic. Asus is a huge company.
e,
It is the biggest
e
vendor for
maribam-se para
DIY parts
isto.
for motherboards, for example,
Né?
and it has significant resources. The money that Asus saves on stiffing customers for warranties, it could at least put into the systems to protect those stiffed customers' information. Asus is a massive multinational company that makes a huge range of
Pois,
products with an equally huge range of associated software,
mas
and those
enquanto não
products date
existirem
back more than
entidades
3
que
decades. Obviously, there are
intelem
going to
esses
be gaps,
gajos,
and
não
acknowledging
adianta, eles
those
fazem o
gaps,
que
including
querem.
some found by Asus
O
itself on
consumidor
public
só
page,
tem que
and
abrir a
working to
pestana
fill them
até às
is responsible
costas.
practice. The irresponsible part is when those gaps appear in shit nobody asked for, like Armoury Crate and Driver Hub, or actually in the case of those, people actively asked not to have. But there's also the issues with my Asus and AI protection and routers and Asus setup. We don't interact with these things if we don't have to, but they're often forced on users or snuck in when we forget to turn them off. They can then leave backdoors and things that we
Isto
didn't even
devia
know
ser
existed. Worse,
obrigatório.
they can be nested for even more
Simples.
access. Now, the fact that there is the potential for, if exploited, access to millions of customer records and information,
Já nem
that
falo
is
até
just
se os
the
programas
usual
não
icing
trouxessem
on the
malwares.
usual
Não,
vulnerability cake.
eles
But some of
não
this other
têm que
stuff,
instalar aquilo que
like
eu
with the
não
routers
pedi.
and again with
Ponto.
Armoury Crate,
É
that
isto.
to us,
É
that
isto.
goes beyond the normal reporting of some company gets
Qualquer
briefed and
dia
millions of
compras
people's
um
information
carro
across the
e o
internet.
carro vai andar
ASUS is just
quilómetros
they are,
contigo
we
lá
think,
dentro
creating
sem
additional
tu
unnecessary risks by self-destruct
autorizares, não é? Ou
practices.
conduzires,
That is it for this
leva-te
one.
para onde
Thanks
ele
for watching. That's
quiser,
a kind of report and catch up of
ok?
what's going on. Again, we are not security
Prontos.
researchers here. We basically read.
Vejam então o vídeo dele. Este vídeo já tem uns tempos porque eu não consegui pôr antes. Vejam lá, já está em julho, guardei-o aqui. Mas eu já falei isto no meu canal, neste tipo de assuntos, está alguns, há meses, ok? Mas isto não fica por aqui, ok? O Armoury Crate, a maior parte da malta vai aqui aos drivers and tools da própria ASUS e vai sacar o programa, ok? E vai instalar. E então aí ainda se abre mais. Specs desliga isto. Vão ver? A malta gosta de instalar os neons, eh, os RGBs e aquelas panelarices todas e depois vai pôr o computador todo aberto para o mundo, ok? O aviso já está, aqui na ASUS, está mais claro. Na Gigabyte, o software que vocês vão sacar e que não devem sacar, Gigabyte Control Center, é outra palhaçada, ok? Não há tão explícito, demonstrado, os malwares que eles têm, mas nós sabemos que têm. Porquê? Porque é por aqui que eles vendem muita questão de publicidades e depois sacam informações daquilo que vocês fazem, do que vocês gostam e passam para eles. E eles depois vendem esses dados. Este é que é o truque, malta. Este é que é o truque. Isto é tudo muito bonito, configura e mais uma vez os RGBs aí. Isto é perigoso. Gigabyte faz exatamente a mesma coisa. É meio assim, Dragon Center, o nome que eles já mudaram o nome deste programa várias vezes. É tudo muito bonitinho. Isto também está, esta opção também aparece na BIOS e está sempre on por defeito, ok? Mesmo que vocês formatem a vossa BIOS, ah, a opção fica outra vez em on. Eu tenho que desativar, porque senão que se entrarem para o Windows, pelo menos eles, tu quando entras para o Windows, ele diz, instala o software. Vocês vão chegar à altura em que nem sequer vão te pedir essa autorização, vão te instalar logo o software, ok? A MSI faz exatamente a mesma coisa. A gráfica da minha, a ASUS ROG, faz exatamente a mesma coisa. Mete aqui o programa para tu sacares, para corrigir, para fazeres isto e fazeres aquilo. Pá, não instalem nada disto. Vocês podem fazer todas estas configurações sem instalarem estes softwares malignos. Isto é maligno, como está comprovado. Ora, é assim, compraste, deste o dinheiro pelo teu material, fazes o que quiseres, certo? Pá, instalas o que quiseres. Agora, a minha parte, como amante da informática e tento ajudar, deixo o alerta, esta informação já passei aqui há meses no canal, há meses, ok? Só que o canal como é pequenininho, pá, e depois a malta não gosta de ver vídeos grandes, porque a gente para explicar isto tem que fazer, vejam este vídeo já vai em 28 minutos, hoje em dia a malta não quer ver vídeos de 20 minutos, ok? Vídeos de 2 minutos perdem o engajamento, é assim que nós estamos agora. Agora, querem aprender coisas com nexo de sentido? Não é por 2 minutos, desculpem lá que vos diga, está bem? Muito obrigado, continuação e até uma próxima. Fui.